The sky was heavy with clouds, dark as spilled ink, when Lady Alara first saw the castle of Duke Kalen. Perched on a jagged cliff, the fortress loomed like a shadow swallowing the land. Its towers pierced the sky, and the wind howled through the stone halls as if warning anyone who dared approach. She had heard stories of him, how the people feared him, how the night seemed to obey his will, and how even the bravest knights whispered his name in trembling tones. Alara's heart thumped, not out of fear alone, but out of the frustration of her fate. She had been summoned to the castle by the king himself. The message was clear. She was to marry Duke Kalen. Politics had no mercy, and her choice had no value. Her father had tried to argue, but he, like all others, had been silenced by the authority of the crown. She rode to the castle with her guards, their horses' hooves striking sparks against the frozen ground. Alara's mind was alive with defiance. She would not go quietly into a marriage that promised nothing but fear and loneliness. She was strong, clever, and brave. She would resist. The gates of the castle opened slowly, grinding like the teeth of some monstrous beast. Shadows spilled into the courtyard, and the soldier's armor gleamed like shards of dark glass. A chill ran through her as she stepped from her carriage, the wind tugging at her cloak. And then she saw him, Kalen. He stood on the balcony above, cloaked in black, his hair dark as midnight, and eyes that seemed to burn through the stone walls. There was a stillness about him, like the calm before a storm. Even from a distance, she felt the weight of his gaze. It was not merely cold, it was commanding, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The guards bowed as he descended. Each step he took made the stones tremble, or perhaps it was only in her imagination. When his eyes met hers, Alara felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. He was handsome in a dangerous way, his features sharp, almost carved from marble, yet softened by shadows that seemed to cling to him like a living thing. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice deep, calm, and yet carrying an edge of authority that made her instinctively straighten her posture. "Welcome to my home." She bowed slightly, holding her chin high. "Thank you, Your Grace, I am honored. Though I must confess I was not expecting an invitation so direct." A faint shadow of a smile flickered across Kalen's face, but it vanished almost immediately. "The king has decided. Your consent is not required." Alara's heart clenched, but she did not show it. "Then I suppose I must obey." "Suppose?" His brow arched. "I will not force you to speak what you do not feel. But know this. Refusal may have consequences beyond what your imagination can fathom." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, yet it did not break her resolve. "I will not marry someone I do not trust," she said firmly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. For the first time, Kalen's expression changed. His dark eyes flashed with something fierce, anger perhaps, or disbelief. "You will regret that," he said, almost to himself. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, swirling at his feet as if the castle itself responded to his mood. Alara followed the servants and guards through the castle's halls, wide and echoing, lined with ancient tapestries depicting wars and victories long past. Candles flickered in the iron sconces, casting trembling lights over the stone walls. Every shadow seemed alive, and she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her every move. They reached a large chamber, furnished with dark velvet and heavy oak. Kalen gestured for her to sit. She did, cautiously, scanning the room for traps or perhaps for signs of magic. Stories spoke of his powers, the ability to summon shadows, to command fear itself, to bend even the night to his will. Kalen did not speak for a long moment. He paced slowly, deliberately, like a predator studying its prey. "Do you know why the king chose me for you?" he asked finally. Alara shook her head. "I imagine it is because you are powerful." He stopped pacing and fixed her with a piercing gaze. "Yes, but power alone is not enough. I need someone who will not break under it. Someone who will stand beside me, or at least not stand against me." She swallowed hard. There was a weight in his words that went beyond mere politics. Something dark and dangerous lingered beneath them. "I will not break," she said quietly. "But I will not be controlled either." Kalen's jaw tightened. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with his anger. For a moment she thought he might strike her, but instead he turned sharply and left the room, his cloak billowing behind him like smoke. That night, Alara was shown to her chambers high in the tower, with windows overlooking the cliffs and stormy seas below. She could hear the wind screaming through the battlements, a chorus of voices warning her to be cautious. Sleep did not come easily. She thought of Kalen, the duke who could command shadows, the man who could inspire terror in the bravest hearts. And yet there was something in his gaze that had unnerved her more than fear alone. A flicker of loneliness, a glimpse of something hidden behind the mask of cruelty. The next morning, Kalen summoned her to the courtyard. The air was sharp, the frost glittering on the cobblestones. Soldiers practiced their drills, their movements precise, yet even their discipline seemed to bend slightly under his presence. "You will learn the ways of this castle," he said, his tone almost clinical. "It is not merely stone and mortar. It breathes, it watches. You must understand it, or it will punish you." Ilara's stomach tightened. "And if I fail?" she asked. Kalen's eyes darkened. "Then you will face the consequences of failing me, and I promise they will be unforgettable." Despite the danger, Ilara did not bow her head. She squared her shoulders. "I will not fail." A cold smile crept across Kalen's face. "We shall see." Over the next days, Ilara explored the castle, guided by Kalen's silent observation. She discovered secret staircases, hidden rooms, and halls that seemed alive, whispering as she passed. Every corridor, every shadow seemed to obey him. She realized the stories were true. The castle and its master were bound in some strange supernatural connection. And yet, there were moments that confused her. Kalen would appear suddenly, standing in a doorway, his expression unreadable. He would ask questions, not about politics, not about her family, but about her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. In those moments, the cold, terrifying Duke seemed almost human. One evening, a storm broke over the cliffs. Rain lashed against the windows and lightning split the sky. Ilara was in the library poring over old maps and books when she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, certain, and full of authority. Kalen entered without knocking. His coat was soaked, and his eyes glinted with a storm of their own. "You read too much," he said softly, almost teasing. "Knowledge is dangerous, but curiosity can save you. Perhaps it will save us both." Ilara felt a strange shiver run down her spine. His words were gentle, almost intimate, yet the aura of danger around him was palpable. She wanted to step back to remind herself that he was the man she had rejected, but something in the way he looked at her made her pause. Before she could respond, a scream echoed from the castle gates. The sound was sharp, filled with panic. Soldiers rushed past, and Kalen's face hardened. He grabbed her hand. "Stay close. This is my world, and it is dangerous for anyone who is unprepared." The shadows in the library deepened around him, swirling like a living mist. For the first time, Ilara understood fully why the kingdom feared him. He was not just a man of power. He was a force, unpredictable and unstoppable. As they ran toward the courtyard, lightning struck the highest tower. The castle trembled, and the wind roared like a living creature. Kalen pushed her behind him, his cloak a shield. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. "Do not run from me," he whispered, "or you will regret it forever." And in that instant, Ilara felt the full weight of her fate. She had rejected the most feared man in the kingdom, and now she would see just how far his madness could reach. The storm raged on, and shadows danced violently across the castle walls. Somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed, half human, half something else. Ilara's heart pounded as she realized this was only the beginning. She had survived the first night. But the real test, the battle between fear, desire, and survival, was only just beginning, to be continued. The storm had passed, but the castle was far from calm. The walls still echoed with thunder, and the shadows lingered longer than they should, twisting across the stone like restless spirits. Lady Ilara walked the corridors, her hands lightly brushing the walls as if feeling the pulse of the castle itself. She had survived the storm, but now she faced something far more dangerous, the man she had refused. Duke Kalen was nowhere to be seen at first, and she felt a strange emptiness in the vast halls. Then from the shadows he appeared. His presence was sudden, like a cold gust of wind, and yet there was something in his eyes, a faint vulnerability that she had not noticed before. "You are exploring," he said quietly, almost observing her. "Curiosity suits you, though it can be deadly here." Ilara straightened her back. "I am learning. If I must live in this castle, I will know its ways." Kalen's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "A clever choice. Though you learn quickly." Despite his words, the air between them was tense. Every glance held the weight of their conflict, her defiance, his power, the dangerous edge of his temper. And yet, Under it all, Ilara began to sense something more. There was pain in him, hidden under layers of fear, rage, and shadows. She did not understand it yet, but she felt it. Days passed in this uneasy rhythm. Kaelin would appear without warning, watching her as she moved through the castle, asking questions about her thoughts, her memories, even her dreams. Ilara answered cautiously, aware that every word could be twisted or used against her. One evening, she discovered a hidden staircase behind a tapestry depicting the kingdom's old wars. The steps spiraled down into darkness, and she hesitated at the top. Curiosity tugged at her stronger than fear. She lit a small candle and descended, the flickering light revealing walls covered with strange markings. At the bottom, she found a chamber unlike any other in the castle. It was small, but filled with relics of Kaelin's family, paintings of ancestors with stern faces, and objects that seemed to hum with energy. On a pedestal lay a book, old and bound in black leather. Ilara approached cautiously, brushing the dust off its cover. The moment she opened it, the air changed. The pages revealed a story of betrayal, sorrow, and darkness. Kaelin's ancestors had been powerful but cursed. Their power came with a cost. Every generation faced loneliness, anger, and the risk of losing control over their own shadows. Kaelin had inherited not only the title of Duke but the curse itself. Ilara's hands trembled as she read. She had always known he was feared, but now she understood why. His anger, his unpredictability, and his obsession were not mere personality. They were the result of a family legacy, a burden he could never escape. "You should not be here." Ilara jumped, spinning around to see Kaelin standing in the doorway. He looked more vulnerable in this chamber, yet still imposing, like a storm barely restrained. I was curious," she said, trying to steady her voice. Kaelin's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "Curiosity can save you, or destroy you." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You see the truth of me, and yet you do not run." "I do not fear truth," Ilara said steadily, meeting his gaze. "I fear only injustice, and cruelty without reason." For a long silence, Kaelin stared at her. The shadows around him pulsed with a strange rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Then he turned abruptly, his cloak swirling behind him, and left the chamber. That night, Ilara could not sleep. She thought about Kaelin, the man behind the fearsome Duke. She could not deny that part of her was drawn to him. This dangerous, tortured figure capable of fury and yet, in rare moments, capable of care. But she also knew the cost of getting close to him. One wrong word, one careless step, and she could fall victim to the darkness he carried. The next day, Kaelin summoned her to the training yard. The sun was weak, struggling through gray clouds, casting pale light over the frozen earth. Soldiers moved like shadows themselves, training with swords, spears, and bows. Kaelin's eyes followed Ilara as she walked toward him. "You will learn to defend yourself," he said. "The world is cruel, and this castle is crueler. Knowledge alone will not save you." Ilara nodded. "I will try." The training was grueling. Kaelin's instructions were precise, almost merciless. He corrected her posture, her grip, her speed, and her focus. Each movement carried weight, each command was a test. She stumbled at first, but gradually she began to move with confidence, guided by his sharp eyes and exacting standards. During a pause, Kaelin approached her. "You are stronger than most," he said quietly, his voice almost gentle. "But strength is only half the battle. You must understand the shadows, the fear that lives in every corner of this place." Ilara frowned. "And if I do not understand them?" Kaelin's expression darkened. "Then they will understand you, in ways you do not wish to know." Despite the warning, Ilara felt no fear, only determination. She realized that the shadows, the cursed power, and even Kaelin himself were all part of a world she could navigate, if she could keep her mind clear and her heart steady. That evening, she found herself wandering the castle gardens. The frost glittered like diamonds under the pale moonlight, and the air smelled of winter's sharp bite. She thought of Kaelin, his anger, his vulnerability, his power, and of the strange attraction growing between them. She did not notice him approaching until he was beside her. "Silent as the night, you think too much," he said softly. "Your mind races faster than your heart. And yet your heart, it beats for something more than survival, does it not?" Ilara looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "but my heart will not lead me blindly into danger." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. Then, as if conceding something to himself, he said, Very well. I will not force you. For now. But beware, Ilara, this castle, this world, and I, we are not gentle. Before she could respond, a sudden noise echoed from the forest below the cliff, a scream, sharp and wild. Kaelin's eyes darkened instantly and he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the tower stairs. The castle is alive tonight, he said, his voice tense. Something moves in the shadows. Something dangerous. They ran through the halls, shadows twisting and clinging to the walls as if alive. The sound of footsteps, growls, and whispers surrounded them. Ilara's heart pounded, not with fear alone, but with the rush of adrenaline and the undeniable tension between them. Kaelin led her to a hidden chamber, one she had never seen before. Heavy iron doors closed behind them, sealing them in darkness. He lit a torch, and the flickering flame revealed ancient symbols carved into the walls, glowing faintly with a magical light. "Stay here," he said. "Do not move." Ilara watched as he stepped into the shadows, disappearing almost entirely. The chamber seemed to pulse with energy, and she could feel the air vibrating with power. Minutes passed. Then Kaelin reappeared, dragging a dark, twisted creature, a shadow born of the forest, its eyes glowing red, its form shifting and unnatural. He struck it with a blade, and it vanished into mist, leaving only the echo of its growl behind. Ilara gasped. You controlled it?" Kaelin's eyes met hers, fierce and unyielding. "It obeys the master of the castle, and I am that master." The weight of his power, his anger, and his presence pressed down on her. She realized that rejecting him had not only angered a man, but challenged a force beyond human understanding. And yet she also saw something else. Vulnerability, the cracks in his armor, the pain that drove his madness. Kaelin turned toward her, shadows flickering across his face. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly. "Why I cannot tolerate weakness. Why defiance is dangerous." Ilara swallowed, meeting his gaze. "I understand, but I will not bow to fear. I will stand, even in the shadows." For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he whispered, "You may survive the castle, but surviving me is another matter entirely." The shadows in the chamber seemed to lean closer, alive with dark energy. Ilara's heart raced as she realized that the true test of courage and of her bond with Kaelin was only beginning. The castle walls trembled once more, as if responding to his fury, and somewhere deep in the fortress an ancient curse stirred. Ilara's fate and the dangerous magnetic duke were now entwined in ways she could not yet comprehend. To be continued. The castle had grown quiet after the storm, but a strange tension lingered in the air. Shadows still whispered along the stone walls, twisting and bending in ways that made Ilara's skin prickle. She had survived the dangers of the forest, the castle's secrets, and Kaelin's unpredictable temper, but now she sensed something greater approaching. Kaelin moved through the halls silently, a figure of dark authority. Yet something in him had changed. The anger that had consumed him in the early days had not vanished, but it was tempered, softened by the presence of Ilara. For the first time, he seemed aware of his own vulnerability, aware that another could see the man behind the darkness. Ilara walked beside him, feeling the weight of their shared journey. She had learned to navigate the castle's secrets, to read its silent language, and to survive the man who had once terrified her. And now she was not just surviving, she was learning to influence him, to reach the humanity buried deep within his shadows. "The curse," she began cautiously, her eyes scanning the twisting shadows along the walls. "It controls so much of you, but is it possible to fight it?" Kaelin's eyes, usually dark and unyielding, softened for a moment. "I have fought it for years," he said quietly. "I have hurt many because of it, because I could not control what lived inside me." Ilara reached out, her hand brushing against his sleeve. "Then let me help. You do not have to bear it alone." He looked at her, the faintest glimmer of emotion crossing his features. For a moment, the fearsome duke vanished, replaced by a man who had been broken by his own legacy. "Do you truly understand what you ask?" he murmured. "I understand enough," she said firmly. "And I choose to stand with you, not because I fear you, but because I see who you are beyond the darkness." Kaelin's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "Very well, then we shall face it together." They moved toward the heart of the castle, to a chamber few had seen. The room was vast, with walls carved from obsidian and etched with symbols of power. In the center lay an ancient relic, a black crystal pulsing with energy, the source of the family curse. Shadows danced around it like living creatures, and the air itself seemed to hum with tension. "This is the core," Kalen said, his voice low. "Destroy it, or cleanse it, and the curse may break. But it will not be easy. The darkness fights back. It does not surrender willingly." Ilara stepped closer, her heart steady. "Then we fight it, together." Kalen placed a hand on her shoulder, an anchor in the swirling chaos of shadows. "Then hold fast," he said. "For once this begins, there will be no turning back." They approached the relic. The shadows recoiled and twisted, forming shapes that whispered threats and accusations, echoes of Kalen's family past. Ilara felt her courage waver, but Kalen's steady hand reminded her to focus. Together, they spoke words of strength, repeating lines from the ancient book she had discovered. Slowly, the shadows began to shrink, curling away from the light of their unity. Kalen struck the relic with a heavy iron staff, and the crystal cracked, releasing a wave of energy that shook the chamber. Ilara shielded her face as the darkness tried to claw back, but Kalen's grip held her steady. The room trembled, stone falling from the walls, and the castle seemed alive, resisting them at every step. Then, in a blinding flash, the crystal shattered. Shadows shrieked and dissolved into nothingness. The oppressive weight that had hung over the castle lifted, leaving a calm that felt almost unreal. Kalen fell to his knees, exhausted, his cloak torn and his hands trembling. Ilara stepped forward, taking his hand. "It's done," she whispered. Kalen looked at her, and for the first time he smiled fully, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something softer, something almost human. "You survived me," he said quietly. "And more than that, you saved me." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. "We saved each other," she replied. For a long moment they simply stood there, hands entwined, breathing in the calm that followed the storm. The castle no longer seemed hostile. Instead, it felt alive in a way that was protective, almost loyal to the bond they had forged. Over the next days, the castle began to change. The shadows no longer twisted maliciously along the halls, and the hidden chambers, once ominous, now seemed like spaces of quiet reflection. Soldiers and servants who had once approached Kalen with fear began to show a cautious respect, sensing the transformation in their master. Kalen, too, changed. He was no longer the untouchable, feared figure of the past. His temper remained, but it was tempered now by understanding, by the recognition of his own power and responsibility. And with Ilara by his side, he learned to balance his authority with patience, fear with respect, and rage with restraint. Yet the transformation was not complete. There were moments when the shadows in his mind still stirred, when old fears and memories of betrayal threatened to resurface, and it was in those moments that Ilara's presence mattered most. She did not shield him from his pain. She held the mirror to it, guiding him toward redemption, helping him see that he could be more than the curse that had haunted him for generations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with gold and crimson, Kalen led Ilara to the highest balcony of the castle. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the sea and the distant forest. The kingdom stretched out below them, peaceful and silent. "You stayed," Kalen said softly, his voice almost vulnerable. "You could have left." "Yet you did not," Ilara smiled faintly. "Because I saw who you are, Kalen. Not the shadows, not the fear, but the man beneath. And I chose to stay, not because of fear, but because of hope." Kalen's eyes, dark and intense, softened as he reached for her hand. "Hope is dangerous. It can hurt as deeply as the darkness. Are you certain you wish to risk it?" "I am certain," she said firmly. "Because love, true love, is worth the risk. And I believe we can be more than what the past has made us." The wind picked up, lifting her hair and cloak, and for a moment, they stood in silence, hearts beating in unison. Kalen pulled her gently closer, and the world around them seemed to pause. The castle, the kingdom, the centuries of curses and shadows, they all faded into the quiet understanding between them. Then Kalen spoke, his voice low and full of emotion. "You have tamed the madness in me, not through fear, not through obedience, but through courage and heart. Perhaps this is the truest form of power I have ever known." Ilara smiled, feeling the tension of the past weeks dissolve into something soft and enduring. And you have learned that power without compassion is meaningless, she said. The stars began to appear in the night sky, shimmering like silver on black velvet. The castle no longer felt like a prison but a home, a place where light and shadow could coexist. Kaelin and Alara stood together, facing the kingdom below, no longer defined by fear, curses, or expectations. Yet, even in this moment of calm, a whisper of the past lingered. The legacy of shadows was never fully gone. The castle had seen centuries of pain and darkness, and somewhere deep in the heart of the fortress, a single echo of old magic trembled, a reminder that life, even redeemed, carries the weight of what came before. Kaelin turned to Alara, his hand still holding hers. "We have survived the darkness," he said softly. "But the world beyond these walls? It will test us yet. Are you ready to face it with me?" Alara met his gaze, courage and determination shining in her eyes. "I am," she said. "Not because I am fearless, but because I know I will not face it alone." Kaelin's lips curved into a small, rare smile. "Then let us face it together. Whatever comes, we will stand as one." The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and the distant sea. Shadows danced on the walls, but now they were no longer threats. They were witnesses to the bond that had been forged in fire, storm, and darkness. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Alara and Kaelin stood on the balcony, their hearts aligned, their pasts acknowledged, and their future uncertain yet filled with hope. The castle had survived centuries of curses, and now, for the first time, so had its duke, and perhaps so had they both. And in the silence of the morning, as the kingdom awoke below, a single thought lingered. Even in darkness, redemption was possible, and love, courageous, steadfast, and unwavering, could conquer the deepest shadows.